Hello and welcome to Dice Tabletop. My name is Chris and today I am going to be slaying some grey. I have got this Brutalis Dreadnought that came in the first premium kit of the Combat Patrol magazine that's out here in the UK at the moment, and it has been sat on my shelf for far too long, just looking unloved and needing a coat of paint. Now, I have unfortunately been ill for about 4 weeks now. I'm just coming out of the tail end of whatever this nasty thing is that's going around at the moment. I've also had massive issues with my 3D printer, which has delayed my main big project, so it's been a perfect opportunity to divert some energy and just make this video on the side whilst I've been sorting out everything that I've needed to with the printer. So, what have we got here then? As I said, this is the Brutalis Dreadnought that came in the first premium kit of the Warhammer Combat Patrol magazine, the other model being the Hive Tyrant that I have also done a video on. So I've kept this mainly together but in a couple of sub-assemblies. The arms come off here and I've still kept a little bit of articulation with them both at the shoulders, as well as the two front armour sections. I want to be able to take those on and off to swap them, as well as be able to get all of that nice detail that we've got that would otherwise be obscured and we couldn't get to if I had glued one of those on. I've kept the rotation of the wrist on his long extended arm, but on his other more coiled punching fist I have that wrist glued in place, but we do have the articulation at the shoulder. Now that we know what we're working with, first things first, priming. As always, I'm starting out with the black primer by Vallejo. This is just the standard one that you can get to go through the airbrush. I'm not thinning this down at all, it comes out perfectly fine straight from the bottle. 2 or 3 coats and you'll get a really nice coverage all over the model. Next up, we're starting with a slight bit of a zenithal highlight, but then moving into really accentuating all of the areas where the light from the top is going to be hitting the most. So this is going to be on the chest area, on the shoulders. As you can see here, he's in this running position, so that leg as it's extenuated back, it's going to create all of these areas that light from the top is going to hit the most. Now, through focusing on the raised areas, we've got a really nice gradient from the white down into black, and what we can do is use that to create a nice tonal variance in the blue that we're going to come and put over the top now. For this first coat, I thinned it down slightly more than I normally would, and I'm going over and putting a fine dusting over everything. I find that I'm able to build up a much more even surface once I've got this fine little layer of paint down first, as opposed to trying to come in and build up to the colour first straight away. So here we are, after about 4 or 5 coats, we've got our blue. Now, building up those areas of white has really helped punch the colours in certain areas, but unfortunately that is slightly washed out under the bright light that I am filming under. Now, before I go any further, whilst I've got a loose recipe in my mind of how I like to paint my ultramarines, I think it's important that we do a little test piece. Starting it off then with some Glorious Gold by Vallejo. I've mentioned before, this is my new favourite gold for painting trim on any model. 2 or 3 coats of this and I defy you to say the results don't look good. After that, it was onto this banner that we've got in the centre. I'm starting off with Barbarian Flesh by Army Painter. It is slightly chalky, this one, and it doesn't cover particularly well, so I did have to put about 4 or 5 thin coats on just to make sure we had that even coverage. Then it's on to my new favourite things to do, and that is panel lining. I've got this really nice thin little brush that's used for something within makeup, but it works perfectly to get into all of these lovely lines on the armour. I am using black ink by Vallejo for this, and once this dries it has a really nice matte finish to it. Moving on then to the rivets. Now, I am an expert at painting these after the Warlord Titan series. Here we are just using lead belcher and a steady hand to go around and pick out every single one of those, as well as these 2 little interesting pieces that we have sticking out of that little panel in the armour on the right. Next, I'm going to give the banner 2 edge highlights with a thinned down bone white, one slightly thicker than the other, just to help give it some tonal variance, before I come over the gold and the banner itself now with 2 thin coats of Agrat's Earthshade. Once I'd given all that some time to dry, time to highlight the gold now, and I'm going to be using Runefang Steel here by Games Workshop. Now I'm just placing the main emphasis on the very edges of all of these 2 layers of feathers, as well as on the top of the skull and around the feet and the wreath at the bottom. Lastly, and probably the main reason why I wanted to do a test piece, it's edge highlighting. Now this really is a weakness of mine, and I will say, if you want to get better at your edge highlighting, this is a fantastic model to practice on. Because of how much bigger all the surface areas are, you can really easily practice, get your eye in, really get your hand-eye coordination down, and since doing this and coming to some smaller models, I do think that it's actually really helped improve my edge highlighting overall. So I'm pretty happy with how this test piece has ended up. I've got a good feel now for what we're going to do for the rest of the model, so let's dive in with some metals. Given that the metal tone is the second primary colour on this, it makes sense that we tackle that next, so I'm going to be putting over 2 thinnish coats of lead belch. After that's dried, I then come in with black. We pick out all of these pipes around the cockpit, as well as any other pipes that are around the rest of the model, on the melter guns at the front here, as well as at the back near the engines. Now, because I am an absolute sucker for Balthazar gold, that's got to find its way onto the model somewhere, so I'm putting it just on the accents of the melter gun here, as well as these raised sections on the back, just to add a little bit more colour variant to the rear of the model. Moving on, we've got a few purity seals across the model, as well as a banner in the centre of the cockpit, so we're going to be painting them the same way using the barbarian flesh and building that up over a few layers just because of the thin, chalky nature of it. Then, once that is dried, we're coming over and putting an edge highlight across all of that with Bone White by Vallejo. Finishing these off then is a bone red base coat all over those wax seals themselves. Next is all that lovely gold detail on the cockpit itself. Now I decided to put a base coat of silver down beforehand. I find that that just helps the gold go over a little bit better. From when I was doing that test piece and putting it over the blue, I felt I needed a couple of extra coats more than it should have done, just to really get that solid opacity to it. To finish off our base coating then, the little handle on the front opening, as well as magazines, get it going over in black. With all of those base coats finished then, we can move on to the next part of detailing this, which is going to be black lining all of the armour and anything that we've just got in little nooks and crannies that we want to be a nice deep dark black. This is a little bit of a juggling act with getting the perfect amount of the ink on your brush, but once you start to get into a flow of it, it gets some really satisfying results. Now what I also did at this stage is went over and painted all of the rivets. Now this ended up being a little bit of a waste of time as I had to come back over and do these later on, but at least it looks pretty whilst I paint the rest of it. So that is all of our base coats now down. Next up we're going to be moving on and we're going to be shading all of the metal tone that we've got on here, as well as all of those purity seals. First off, I'm using Reichland Flesh Shade. That's going over all of the gold tone as well as any parchment that we've got. We're getting 2 thin coats built up on this like we did beforehand, but making sure that we're getting some nice poolage in those shadows. Next up is 2 thin coats of Nuln Oil all over the silver tone. I've messed about quite a lot with trying to find a really nice black for shading silver, and I just can't beat Nuln Oil. I've tried so many different things, and it's really rapidly now becoming a nice safe haven to go to. And once that's dry, here you can see why. I just love the depth that this puts into the metal. And what you can also do from here now is you can start to build it up and make it as dirty and as rusted as you would like. I quite like a nice clean look on my Space Marines, so I'm not going to take this any further for now. The next step then to making this silver really pop is to edge highlight it all with Runefang Silver by Games Workshop. I'm just using the side of my brush here and as carefully as I can picking out all of these edges, not worrying too much if I deviate slightly. It kind of looks like little scratches that we've got on there, but I really am trying to be careful just to grab the edges. As I say, I like quite a clean look to my Space Marines, so this is just a matter of putting some music on, taking your time and just getting into a flow of it. Now the other reason why I chose to do the steel first is because I am not that good at edge highlighting when it comes to armor. So this really helped just get my eye in and get a little bit of a method down on something that was more easily correctable than if I went and made a mistake edge highlighting this blue. Just like the red, it was a matter of taking my time, getting into a workflow with it. One of the big things that I ended up finding is that I would get a little bit too comfortable as I was painting and end up rushing things. It's important just to keep a nice steady flow and you'll get some good edge highlights. I'm by no means an expert, but as I was saying, if you need to learn and get better at painting those edge highlights, then really give this model a go. It is nowhere near as daunting as it might look. Lastly then, to finish off the edge highlighting, we are using Anthracite Grey by Scale 75 just on the magazines as well as a couple of pipes. The bullet casings inside of the magazines all got a base coat of Balthasar Gold, and then once that had dried, I'd come over just with a thick coat this time of Nuln Oil just to really get it sitting in those recesses. Time to revisit the metal now. That Nuln Oil was really good to put a nice shade into the metal, but it wasn't thick enough to really pool and create some nice dark spots where we want it to. So this is where I'm coming back with the ink by Vallejo and building up a few coats of it in all of these dark recesses that I really want to just emphasize that there's a deep shadow. Next up, we're giving attention to the center here, and we are edge highlighting all of this gold with a Rune Fang steel, just picking out all of those edges and trying to make that gold pop just like we had on the test piece. I'm also putting a highlight down on this banner, which is a 50-50 mix of bone white and barbarian flesh. That mix then is also used just to highlight the purity seals. Next bit of detail that needs to be painted is these lenses. Now, I did do a test piece off camera just to see how fiddly it was. Now, I have never really painted lenses before, so I followed a guide online, and yeah, I'm not dexterous enough to be able to paint this on camera. So let me show you how I did it. First was a very dark red. Then in the top right hand side of that, I applied a blood red by Vallejo. We then built up that top layer a little bit more with orange fire by Vallejo. I then mixed that orange fire with a little bit of bone white, and then in the opposite corner I just put a dab of white in the black spot, and that just helps create the illusion of a 3D lens by having a glare spot. Now, as I say, as I haven't painted lenses before, I was really happy with how these had turned out, especially the one that we've got here on this gun on the top. That one was so intricate to do, but it was so worth persevering with. Next up is painting this light. Now, I had a couple of different ideas of how I wanted to go about this, but in the end I ended up base coating it all back white. I then put 2 coats of yellow glaze on by Two Thin Coats Duncan Rhodes paint brand. Once that had dried, I then came over the top and really finally picked out those metal guards that we've got on the light. What I didn't decide to do was to try and put any offside lighting effect on it. I'm just really happy with the clean look that I've got of the Dreadnought at the moment, and I didn't want to risk coming at it with an airbrush and potentially ruining it. Let's round this off then, and we're painting these pipes a combination of Rune Fang steel as well as Balthasar gold. Now, I'm not going to be shading these as much as the other metal tones that I've done across the model. This is because it's going to be under that front armor section, so therefore theoretically should be a little bit more clean as it wouldn't see as much dirt. The ribbed pipes stayed black, and I just gave these a edge highlight then of Stonewall Grey just to help pick out those raised areas. So here we have the finished Brutalis. I'm really happy with how this turned out. Edge highlighting really isn't one of my strong points, but this is such a forgiving model to work on, and it inspires so much confidence. I've now been approaching my other models just getting stuck in, not thinking too much about it, and generally I think I've made an improvement since painting this Dreadnought. In order now to really make this paint scheme pop, we need to come and take a look at the base. Starting off with these rocks then. Now, against my better judgment, I used an old pot of grey acrylic that I had in the drawer. As you can see, the consistency is awful on that. So I switched it up and just chose another lighter grey than I originally wanted to start off with, but that's not too much of a bother. We're going to be bringing this down quite heavily with a couple of washes later on anyway. So I'm not being neat with this whatsoever. We're just making sure to get a nice couple of coats down to make sure we have everything covered. Once those rocks were dried, I can move on now and turn my attention to the mud. So what I'm going to be doing is a sort of technique that I've just built up over time, and I find that this gives me a really good, nice, natural mud effect. So I have 4 acrylics here, black, brown, yellow, and white, and I'm just going to be putting them on a little offcut of glossy card here, just so they're quite easy to sort of pick up with the brush, and they're not going to get absorbed and end up drying out too quickly. Now the idea with this is that we're going to be blending all of the colours together on the base, starting off with white, then moving on to a little bit of brown and mixing yellow into it. We're going to be mixing those three colours in different quantities as we go all over the base, and this is just going to help get a really nice different variety of earth tones appearing. I'm also coming down in some areas and putting a tiny bit of black. It is very overpowering when you work this way, so if you are doing this, go sparingly. It's quite easy to turn your whole base into a black-brown mess. So I think I'm going to leave it there in terms of mixing it all together. It does end up drying a little bit brighter, so if you're not too sure about the effect, wait until it dries before you make any adjustments. Next up, we're blending in some of the oversplash from the grey that's come onto the rocks, but not too much. This is going to help create the effect that mud has been kicked up and is landing on top of those rocks. We don't want them looking too clean. This is the 41st millennium after all. Next up, everything is getting a light dry brush of a medium grey. I'm painting this in the same theme as a lot of my other models bases, which is designed to play on my tabletop at home, and that is a dusty, war-torn urban environment with brick and concrete dust strewn everywhere. Over the top of that medium grey goes a lighter grey then, and we're mainly putting it towards the edges of everything. I still want a little bit of darkness in the centre of those rocks. For the other little accents that are on this base, they're mainly being picked out with a lead belcher, as well as a barbarian flesh for the skull, and a red tone for this fuel tank. All those colours we built up can start to be brought together now with a wash. So unfortunately I did end up adding a little bit too much black to this mix. I would have liked it to have been a bit more brown. So I just added quite a bit of extra water just to thin it down so it wouldn't be as strong. But overall, once it had dried, I was happy with the result. Finally then, everything gets a dry brush of the light grey, just to bring some brightness back to all of those edges. Okay, we have our base now finished. It's looking lovely and dusty and fits in perfectly with my Ruined City tabletop. Next, we need to really kick this model up to the next level, and in order to do that, we're going to have to put some transfers on it. I've got these two loose arms here, so let's use one as a guinea pig. So because I got this model in the Combat Patrol magazine, it didn't come with any transfers. So I've had to dig through all of my transfer sheets and try and find the largest ultramarine symbols that I can. I've narrowed it down to these two sheets, and we're going to start with these on the left hand side. So we're cutting this out now with our sharp craft knife, rounding up the edges as neat as possible, and then submerging this in water to get it a good soak. The area that I'm going to put the transfer on gets a little bit of a wetness as well, just to help the transfer now slide off its backing piece and enable it to be moved easily on the surface. Once I was happy with the placement, I'm using one of these pottery sculpting sort of silicone tools just to squeegee out the moisture from underneath the decal, and that I find just helps it grip and stick slightly quicker. Finally, a quick blast with the airbrush helps get all of that final bit of moisture off. And I think we've got a pretty successful test piece, so it's on to the next. Now I went for a combination of just rule of cool, whatever I thought would look good on the model, as well as I definitely wanted the yellow, I believe it is the second company sort of symbol on the front. For the knees, I found this piece of text that I really wanted to put on there, as well as a campaign badge, and then just a number to populate the other side. Now I haven't invested in Microsol and Microset just yet. I definitely will be for the next project, as that's going to use a lot of transfers. But here I am just coming over the top of them now with a thinned down matte varnish, just building up a few coats to take away that glossiness that the decal naturally has. The time has finally come then that I can put this little piece of crotch armor on, as this is the last piece. I had left this off just to make it easier to paint in general. I'd almost forgot about it, to be honest, until I saw it sat there on the cork. So a little bit of super glue, and press this in place, and there we have it. That now looks so much better. Before we can truly call this model done though, we've got to come in and paint that rim black. And here we have the Brutalis Dreadnought in all its finished glory. This has been such a fun model to paint. I've had it built for so long, and it's so nice to finally see some colour on it. This also really has been such a great help in improving my edge highlighting skills overall, having such a large surface area to work with and just building up the confidence just to go at them. I've since come down to the smaller Space Marine models and I've been getting a much better finish on all the shoulder pads, the knee pads, those little bits on the hands, all the bits that are normally tricky. Now, as I mentioned at the start of this video, I've unfortunately been ill for a few weeks, as well as having just an insane amount of issues with my 3D printer. I've now overcome them and nearly everything is printed off now for the next project, so I can go ahead and give you just a little teaser piece here. I'm sure this will be enough for some of you to get an idea of what it will be. So let me finish off then with just saying a thank you for bearing with me whilst I've gotten over all these issues, as well as for watching this video to the end. I hope you enjoyed it. It would be a great help to the channel if you could please like this video as well as subscribe, because it's time to kick off a whole new series of fun.